A very good evening to everybody who's joining in. I'm Dr. Amaey Parekh from the Thinking Parrot Academy, and we are live today on a Friday, which is not our usual day, but we've got an amazing guest joining us today. Dr. Radley is joining us all the way from the US, and he's going to be talking to us about trauma. I think something that he's really familiar with, and he's an expert at it because he's even authored a book on it. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and an insightful session for all of us. So I look forward to having all of you join in. Dr. Radley's already come in, so let me get him on board. And if you'll have any questions until then, be more than willing to try and answer as many as we can. Hello, Dr. Radley. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Could you hear me?
Yeah, good. There's a little bit of I think an echo. Are you on two devices?
No, I'm on one.
Okay. Because I am hearing my voice.
Okay, let me try switching devices because sometimes that happens with one of. So let me just switch out and then another one.
So if you guys have any questions that's related to emotional hurt or feeling some sort of bad experience in your life that's stayed with you, or maybe it happened in your childhood, maybe it happened to you now, or anything that you've been not been able to move on in some ways, or you think has been affecting you in some ways, this is a good day to talk about it because Dr. Radley will also be able to share a lot of his insights into this. Emotional trauma is a very significant topic according to me, because not only does it affect your mental health, but emotions also play a havoc in your physical health. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot about it today. Just give us a minute. We're just having some technical setup, so I think that should take another minute or so.
Are you hearing me better there now?
Yeah. No, there's no echo also now, so it's all good.
No echoes, right?
Yeah, no echo. So first of all, a big thank you, Dr. Radley, for joining in. You were very warm to just accept my invite, so really grateful for you being here. Is the video pausing for all of us? For me, or I don't know what's happening here.
It was pausing for me as well.
All right. So again, I think it's working now. So once again, a big thank you, Dr. Radley, for joining in. I'm really glad to have you here on board because I think you're an expert at this topic, and I think we're going to have some wonderful insights from you. So once again, big thank you. So
thank you for having me.
Yes, Dr. Radley, would you like to maybe just talk a little bit about what you do and where you're from and everything, so that it'll be a good introduction to the people who are also watching, and then we can begin with the session.
Okay. So, hi, my name is Dr. Radley Ramdan. I currently practice in Trinidad. I studied naturopathic medicine and acupuncture in the US. So I have my degrees in both of that. I'm a licensed acupuncturist as well. When I did my thesis, I worked on the topic of PTSD, and I sort of had like a passion for that specific topic. So I did my thesis on it. I've done multiple presentations on this topic. I've written different articles, and recently I had my book published on trauma to PTSD root causes to healing branches. So that's a quick synopsis of me.
That's wonderful to hear. So when we talk about trauma, so do you think you want to maybe share some light on the word trauma, because it may be quite impactful for some people, and some people feel that even if though they had a smaller experience, they feel that the trauma is not valid anymore. So anything that you want to maybe shed light on this particular word, or on this topic.
So you hit the nail on the head by saying that there's a lot of people that sort of overlook their traumas, or they try to minimize the effects of their traumas. A lot of times we get stuck into this mentality that trauma has to be something major or some major disaster or event within our lives. Um, Growing up and living in the Western Hemisphere and even in the US, a lot of times we associated PTSD with military involvement. So that's where the biggest set of PTSD tends to stem from. And most people see trauma having to be something of that type of caliber, where it has to be some major significant event, life-changing event. Um, but what I've noticed in my practice and just working with patients in general during my time at school and even now, um, that a lot of trauma builds on each other, and a lot of time it stems from very small, minute things that we don't always think about. Trauma could be something as small as neglect growing up as a child. Um, and we hold on to the effects of that neglect for a very long time. And then that in itself, as a trauma, becomes like a magnet to more trauma. So you sort of like draw in more aspects of trauma because of that. Um, like you said, it's a tough thing to give like a direct definition for, but a lot of times we do see people sort of allowing that very minuscule um, effects of trauma from actually taking the forefront, and we neglect it. So I think that's something important that we have to consider. And we have to avoid going down that line or down that rabbit hole of saying that whatever our trauma is, it is too small. We compare our traumas to other people often, and we try to minimize the effects of our trauma because we don't think or we don't try to validate our trauma. And I think that's where one of the biggest issues in terms of its long-term effect comes in.
That's very well said. So I think a lot of times, even when I see my clients, they sort of, minimize it. They do not actually realize the impact that it's been having in all the patterns in their life. It's actually been, like you said, it keeps building up. And I think that is one thing that we really need to stress on, that, even although it could have been a small trigger, that trigger keeps on building in various ways, and we start seeing it in a lot of aspects of our life. Now, when we talk about emotional trauma, like, when you talk about emotions, do you think trauma would be, limited only to, say, interpersonal relationship, like a parent-child relationship or a couple relationship? Or do you think we could also be inflicting some self-trauma as well?
Um, yes, yes to all of the above. I do think, especially the self-trauma, a lot of times we try to internalize things. And as a result of that, we create a lot of like emotional trauma for ourselves. So a simple example is I take an exam and I didn't get 100%. There are some people who would react, everybody reacts differently to their grades in a test. Some people would hold it against themselves and sort of create like an emotional trauma for themselves because they didn't get their goal on that exam. So, for example, you didn't get 100% and you got 99%. Even people then, they still create that like self-doubt, or they try to question like, why didn't I do as well as I like to? What did I miss? And they put themselves under an emotional stress and an emotional trauma just from that. So it doesn't always have to stem from something relationship wise between an individual and another person. It could just be the way that we see ourselves a lot of times.
Exactly. So a lot of times we may not realize it, but we could be inflicting trauma on ourselves without even being aware of it. So that's wonderfully described, Dr. Gaddi. Now, when we talk about trauma, do you think it also affects just our mental health, or it also affects our physical health, or what do you think are the ill effects of trauma? And if there's anything that you want to ask me ahead of you're most welcome to. I'm waiting for some questions to come in, but until that time, you're the speaker today.
That's fine. So when I so having the naturopathic medicine background, I approach things from what I've broken down into six aspects of health. So I consider things as physical aspect of health, mental, emotional, spiritual, environmental, and I don't know why I can't recall the sixth one off the top of my head. But
That's
it's
good.
broken down into to six different aspects. And I think everything overlaps with each other. It's difficult to separate mental and emotional and physical aspects of our health together. So I do think that whenever we go through any type of trauma, um, there is that physical aspect that happens, and it's easier to see. But the mental part is that usually the toughest part to see because a lot of people still hold a stigmatization towards seeking out any type of mental health. So the first thing they say to themselves is, "I don't have anything mentally wrong with me," and I think that's the wrong approach. And I know like within the Asian culture, we have that stigma towards mental health as a whole, and it makes it difficult for our culture to accept things like that. So we put a front or we put a wall up immediately to block that off as quickly as we could. Behind the wall, though, everything happens. We are affected mentally, we are affected emotionally, and we are affected physically. I have actually seen patients who've had various health conditions that do have a connection to some type of emotional or mental um, trauma that they've either put themselves through or they've experienced in the past. Um, I know with acupuncture and Chinese medicine, you have that correlation of different internal organs or acupuncture channels that correlates to different types of emotions. And I have actually seen things like that played out with physical um, manifestation of conditions. So, for example, I have seen patients who've had connections with various type of lung issues or even lung cancer or breast cancer that have had a history of emotional grief, either overexpression of grief or suppression of grief, and they've developed like these various types of health conditions associated with the lung. And from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, the lung is correlated to the emotion of grief. So that is like one example of where I've seen it manifested that way. I have also seen a couple of Parkinson's patients that when you do, there are specific treatments that you could do geared more towards like emotional treatment with patients. And I've seen that when you switch it more to an emotional treatment, they make significant improvements in their way that they respond. So I have seen that connection between physical and mental and emotional conditions from varying aspects of it.
Yes, so that's. I think there's a lot of psychosomatic expression that does come in, and we tend to see it in a lot of, I mean, including day-to-day issues. I think even issues like hypertension and diabetes. I think there is a lot of emotional component also stored, and I think trauma is also significantly responsible in a lot of conditions. I do not know if how much do you follow Louise Hay. I don't know. She's one of the people that I actually really like the book of because I mean it talks about a lot about psychosomatic conditions from a very layman's perspective, for the very common man. I mean, not on a counselor's aspect, but I think the concept that trauma does affect all aspects of our life, including our health, is something that we really need to look at because it's not identified. I think as doctors also, I mean, in India especially, we see patients coming and we just prescribe. We just prescribe because we don't even actually look into the possible psychological component to the issue. It's a very common thing that's overlooked, and I've experienced this myself. So I'm just letting I think it's something that really needs to be looked at. So now talking about emotional trauma getting stored in our body, how do you release this trauma? Like what techniques do you see in your clients or use in your clients?
So, like I mentioned before, one thing I utilize is acupuncture. Apart from acupuncture, I try to find different things that works for patients. So a lot of times to me, or what I've found in general, is that in order to release any type of emotional trauma, you have to have something that the patient could relate to. And releasing emotional trauma for a lot of patients are sometimes difficult. They don't always feel comfortable to do it. Oftentimes, our first line of thinking is that therapy or any type of therapy involves talking, and a lot of times there are patients who are very hesitant to talk about various types of emotions or the history associated with those specific emotions. Um, so I have utilized things like art therapy with patients. I've utilized things like writing therapy, music, um, various styles of art, so painting, coloring, things like that. I have utilized writing in like different aspects of it, where it's like a structured writing versus journaling. A lot of it is really just something that the patient could connect to. So my approach typically would involve first finding out from the patient something that they like doing. And if they like writing, have them utilize writing to their benefits of doing it. If patients, for example, like music, utilize music either through the aspect of listening to music or playing music, as the case might be, whichever one they're more drawn toward. And what I have them do is try to think of if they have to express this specific emotion, what would be the instrument that they would want to play, or what type of music would they want to listen to that they feel like they're able to connect most to. And I have them even go to the extent of like, all right, now think of songs that you like that when you listen to that you feel that you could just let go of everything and everything, um, where you could just feel like completely relaxed pretty much. And I have them utilize that. So utilizing music in terms of that style is one way. In terms of writing, sometimes it starts with a specific theme that I see coming up for the patient. Just have them write on that specific theme. If they don't feel comfortable enough to go straight into writing about the specific event that they could connect their emotional traumas to. Um, Sometimes it's very structured writing where I would tell them only write for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, whatever comes to mind about that specific topic, just write it. Other clients I've worked with, they went to the point where it's just like a journal and they just write day to day on different aspects of it. In terms of using art, sometimes it's things like drawing, coloring, painting, and then just utilizing different aspects of those things to help as well. So, for example, if you draw in, you could use shading as a means to express emotions. So there are various aspects of emotions where it's like, all right, I'm angry. I could use a darker shading to represent anger. Or if I am feeling more depressed, I could use a certain shade of the way that I'm drawing in order to get that emotion out. And then whatever you pay, just sort of paint or use or do art wise, just allow yourself to think of whatever that specific event is and allow it to express itself in that drawing or painting or coloring. Same thing with colors. You could use different colors to associate with different emotions. You could either do like free painting or you could do free coloring, or you could even use things like mandalas. Like I've had patients use different mandalas. Just pick one that you find like you could connect to, and then say like, all right, I want to focus on an event that happened to me when I was 10 years old. Think of every emotion that you could relate that specific event to, and then color based on that. So pick one color for each emotion, and then just paint that or color out that specific emotion. Wherever you feel on that mandala to use it, just do it. And then once you're done with that color, change and do another color. And that's kind of like my approach that I've used with patients. I also have the opportunity for them to talk. But again, some patients are hesitant on talking and bringing up certain things. So sometimes they would start with those things and then they would feel more comfortable opening up about certain things and actually talking about it.
Rightly said. So I use a lot of art therapy myself, so I know it works quite well because it gives the clients a safe space. I think that's the first thing that it gives them. So it gives them an opportunity to release certain things without actually having to acknowledge that they're doing that. So once they actually make it much more tangible in some form or the other, I think dealing with the trauma becomes it becomes the first step to dealing with trauma. It's acceptance, I think, which is the first step to you know coming to terms with the healing process. So I think arts or expressive art therapies work wonderfully well. We've got a question. Let's just first take that up. Uh, okay, how do you reach out to people who know need help but just can't see it for themselves? Asking from the perspective of a friend, family member, etc., not as a doctor, because outside of being a doctor, we still have these relationships. Uh, Dr. Daddy, do you want to start the question? And then, because Dr. Mansi is a good friend of yours as well, so
Yeah. So, hi, Dr. Mansi. Thanks for joining us today. So, the question is, how do you reach out to people who you know needs help but just can't see it for themselves? My approach is usually try to give them small hints. Like I said, a lot of times within our culture, we are very hesitant to dealing with any type of mental or emotional trauma or stress. We feel like that doesn't exist in our realm. We're invincible to that for whatever reason. Um, so what I've done usually is try to give small hints, just generalize topic without trying to specifically target exactly what you want to get out of them. Um, I have even like just had them just do like, oh, let's just talk about this random topic, and then bring certain things up, throw certain ideas of it out. Um, it's a tough thing to do when people don't want to see it for themselves. So a lot of it is try to give like little hints in the back of their minds and be consistent with it. Um, Usually when people are very hesitant to things like that, the harder you push is the stronger they resist. So sometimes the little hints goes a long way. It may not necessarily seem like it's working right away, but sometimes it takes a longer time to break down that specific wall that that patient has to do. Once they see it themselves, it makes it easier for them to recognize it and to deal with it. The more you try to force something on them, the more hesitant they would be, or the more closed in they would be about it, and the more they would put up a wall, higher, wider, stronger wall that they would try to put up around it.
yeah, I think the thing is the moment we try to help people who are not yet ready for help, I think a lot of times it in fact does backfire. That's my personal experience. So giving them space and giving them a feeling that they're safe in some ways, or giving them the or just letting them know that you're available for them, in case at some stage they need to speak out or they need to vent out, just letting them know that the availability is there. I think that makes a lot of difference because it is like at one point it comes. I think it's an internal calling that you want to do something for yourself. I think till that time, how much ever you try or how much ever somebody suggests, it doesn't work. It at some point of time you realize that, okay, I want to make my life better, and that's when you start taking help. Even if 100 people offer help, I think till the time that you're ready to help yourself, I think it doesn't work. That's just my personal opinion, not as a counselor, not as anything, but as a friend also. I feel that sometimes you just have to wait for the other person to be ready. You give them the option that you're there. You acknowledge that, okay, like the Dr. Zandi said, you give them some small hints, but pushing fails miserably because it actually goes onto their own feelings of self-worth. It goes onto their belief systems, and it sort of replays the trauma in a very different way in their minds. So the perceptive reality changes, so whatever actually your intention was, but their perception of reality comes out to be something quite different. So I think that is something that I can just say, that be very patient and at some stage you need to decide how much can you help that person if he or she is not ready to help themselves. And that's just my personal opinion.
No, I agree with that. It's definitely that. It's only so much you could do to help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves. And there's a saying that says you could take the camel to the water, but you can't make the camel necessarily drink it. So I think that same concept applies to even things like that when it comes to trying to promote mental health or emotional health to patients or even family members, friends, whatever it is, or whoever it is. The bigger their resistance, the harder, I mean, the harder it becomes for you to get in there. And I think, even in my opinion, that smaller approach and those little hints actually work a lot better than trying to force it onto them. Because even within that, like you mentioned, there is that trauma that they sort of feel like everything becomes a new trauma towards it. So they feel like because you're forcing them to do something that they're not necessarily comfortable with, they internalize it as a form of trauma as well. So it just sort of adds to their trauma rather than actually helping them that way.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So, thank you for the question, Dr. Mansi. If anybody else has any questions related to trauma, emotional trauma, or just, anything that you want to ask, Dr. Radley's here. We at least got maybe a few more minutes before we can end the session. So, anything you want to ask, you're most welcome to. Dr. Radley, I mean, I'm just asking this very randomly because Dr. Mansi and I were speaking. So, there's something about craniosacral therapy. So, do you also use that for trauma per se?
I do. Sometimes I forget that I use it. I don't use it a lot. With patients, a lot of times it's really what is more comfortable with patients. So some patients are resistant to craniosacral therapy, but I have used it with different patients, and I have found it very successful for patients. Again, it goes back to the same thing. If some patients are not open to certain things, even trying to do it with them, even though that you know that it could be beneficial for them. Once they sort of put a mental block on something, I feel like it's difficult to utilize that specific type of therapy to help them. Um, I actually do like and I enjoy doing it a lot. The craniosacral therapy, I've worked with patients during the time of being in school, as well as in my practice now doing craniosacral therapy.
And do you think trauma works better on a cognitive, treating trauma on a cognitive level works better, on a subconscious level works better, or like I normally combine energy psychology with hypnotherapy, or I use emotional freedom techniques, so I use art therapy, so I combine these modalities. So in fact, I work quite lesser with the cognitive therapies comparatively because I personally prefer to work on a deeper level. What is your approach, or what do you think works better?
So I'm flexible when it comes to that. It really depends on the patient or the client that I have at hand. I do have a preference, like you, to work a lot more on the deeper levels because I feel like a lot of times as we grow and we go through our lives, um, every day we were exposed to some type of stress or trauma, and we internalize pieces of it. And a lot of times, the big traumas that we've had earlier on in life, we suppress it so deep that it becomes on that subconscious level. We forget about it unless something reminds us. And even when something actually reminds us, we try to block it off again. So I do think working on the deeper level is definitely more important. Um, a lot of times I would combine different types of therapies. So using acupuncture with talk, doing even when I'm doing craniosacral therapy, sometimes I would utilize talking with the patient and have them sort of like guide their way through certain things, have them sort of tap into that subconscious level and see what comes up for them. Um, and again, it just depends on the patient, really. But I do find it more effective when patients are able to make those deeper connections because, like I said, the longer we suppress something, the deeper it becomes rooted inside of us. And it would continue to create its effects, even though we don't necessarily bring awareness to that specific aspect of it.
Right. All right. So thank you, Dr. Radley. I mean, you've been really, really insightful in all your explanations, and I think we've all learned quite a lot of things about trauma and its management as well. So a big thank you for joining in. Again, if you guys have any questions, you're free to DM me, free to DM Dr. Radley, and we'd be happy to get back to you in case you'll have some questions. And until then, I look forward to hopefully having Dr. Mansi also join in very soon, and maybe then we can all have a live session together.
That would be great.
All right. So thank you once again for your time and your energy, and I will see you very soon.
And thank you again for creating the space for me to have this opportunity to do
Most
this.
time, I am really, really grateful that you joined in. So, all right. Thank you. Bye bye,
Take,
everybody. Take care.
bye.
All right. Bye bye.